so it's going on YouTube and Zoom.
That's correct, yeah.
And the mics don't particularly matter for that.
I think they help. Yeah.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It is 9:30. This Newham local examination hearing is now open, and we'll ask the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. Can you hear me at the back there? Is it from the microphone, or is it just my voice? You louder?
Maybe a little bit closer. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if anyone can't hear, and Hannah, do you let me know if it's too quiet. Right. So a reminder, please, if everyone could switch mobile phones, laptops to silent. No fire alarm tests come today.
I think so.
No, okay. So if the alarm does go off, we will need to evacuate the building following the green emergency exit sign. So back out through the door into the lobby around to the left, and out, and then the congregate at the far end of the building, opposite the DLR station. So the programme officer, Hannah, is around today, so if you need any assistance with this hearing or the examination, that work. So today we're dealing with mainly matter 5 this morning, which is about housing allowance supply and the numbers, and matter 7 is emergency travel accommodation. Before we look at matter 5, there's a couple of sort of procedural type things we're going to deal with to do with what's happened since week 2 hearings, which are 2 main things, I think. One is the council's action point responses. The council's responses to my action points from weeks 1 and 2 in general, and also the latest schedule of main modifications that have been published yesterday. I'll say a few words and give people an opportunity to ask procedural queries on those things. Okay, so a reminder, which I'm sure you're all aware of, that the examinations to help it if the submitted plan, the plan submitted on the 18th of July last year is legally compliant and sound, and if not, it could be modified to ensure that it is. I'll start each agenda item with some questions. The responses to those direct contributions from those who wish to speak, just put their name right vertically, and I'll bring them in at the appropriate time. I think we'll try and use the microphone, so it's a matter of sharing the one that's nearest to you with people closest to you. So just to outline, which I assume that you picked up on, I published notes on the 8th and 17th of December setting out action points following the week 1 and 2 hearing sessions. The council's responses to those were published on the 20th of December, that's ED 17, response to week 1 action points, and the 9th of January, that's ED 19, response to week 2 action points. So obviously those responses from the council have not been discussed, they came after the hearing sessions. So what I did was publish a note on the 5th of January, IN8, which set out for each action point, and I intend to discuss it at either this week or in week 4. So hopefully that's clear. And the agenda for this week the agendas for this week have been published, and they include the relevant action points on those. So hopefully we've kept up with that. And there are some of those responses that will be discussed not so much today, but through the course of this week and week 4. The council's proposed modifications to the plans and the latest schedule, I'll say a bit more about that in a minute, but I think before I do that, I'll just go around the table and let everyone introduce themselves, and I'll see if there's any general queries from anyone, and then we'll talk about the schedule of main modifications. So if I could start with the council, please.
Claire Lawrence, Principal Planner, London Borough of Newham.
Lee Edmund, Assistant Local Manager.
Director, Senior Planner.
So if I go over to the other side of the room.
So my name is Selina Cahoon. I'm here on AIM,
Yes.
And I'm counsel for my clients. Substantive.
For a ramble.
Good morning. Rebecca Burnham, Planning Director, Quad here on behalf of St William.
And John Turner, Director of Town Planning for London Group.
And I'm John Rayshot, Director of Job Planning, representing the platform.
Can you hear at the back people speaking on the microphone? You can. Okay. I think we'll try and use the microphone when you're actually speaking. Okay. So, as I say, I'll talk about the schedule of main modifications that were published yesterday, I think, in a minute. But are there any other more general queries anybody has, procedural matters, before I do that? Right, so main modifications are obviously a key part of any local examination. When the council submitted the plan in July last year, it's a schedule of proposed modifications. It's prepared in response to Regulation 19 representation. I advised that as those modifications didn't form part of the plan that I was formally examining, I wouldn't be considering them at that stage, but if they became relevant, if the council thought they were relevant when they responded to my question, it's standards that proposed them at that time. So that was just in response to my question, my issues and question. And in fact, there were two versions that were and so some of those were discussed at the week 1 and week 2 hearing sessions. An updated version was published on the beginning of January, I think it would be 29th of January. And that basically was meant to be, I think, get the council to confirm this, a comprehensive set of modifications proposed 1 to 16 for a new one. So that was, and that replaced any earlier version. That was the 29th of January. But I think, having looked at it and having reflected on, I think, something that the council said one of the hearing sessions, it struck me that not all of those modifications may actually be made modifications. I mean, ultimately, it's my decision on if the plan submitted is sound or not sound, and if it isn't, what main modification is needed. But it seems to me that falling within that, with the modifications in the 20 were some of the minor modifications. I've gone into another category, which there is, between main modifications that necessarily make the plan sound and minor modifications that the council can make that don't particularly affect the policies. There are changes to the plan that the council may have proposed because they approve it, they'll address an issue raised by representatives and the Reg 19 reps, etc. So anyway, I published a note so ago and asked the council from their point of view go through, which they helpfully did. It was published. I saw it on Friday, I think, but it was published yesterday. It's a colour coded that puts the oral modifications into one of those 3 categories, i.e., the council think are essential to make the plan sound, that are minor, don't materially affect the plan's policies, some that fall within another category. It's neither of those categories, if you see what I mean. So can I just go through the categories? You basically just thought about each one, and whether it was essential for sound. That's the first thing. Yes.
Okay. So the first one, which was green, was essential for soundness.
Yeah.
The other one, which was yellow, was what we think is modification, but not essential for soundness. So it could be policies, it could be justification, implementation text. And then the last one is other, so it's kind of non-consequential, minor.
Yeah, the yellow ones.
And the yellow ones are the modification, the minor modifications.
Yeah, okay. So just to be clear then, in the schedule that we've got, and hopefully people have got it, I know it was only yesterday, I think, it was published. Have you looking around?
I'm so sorry, sir. I've been handed the colour-coded one. I'm afraid I didn't spot it online. Does it have a number, sir?
I think it was rather confusingly, it was also called ED20. I think I suggested we'll probably keep it as a second.
It's,
I think it may be ED20 that's just put in place with the colour coding. Because there's nothing in it that's different other than the colour coding.
Right.
yeah, just a
Yeah, so the mods are all there. It's just the category of the councils. Put them in as a peer.
But I'm just having a look. Apparently, it's not up yet, so we can try and get that up now. Apology.
Oh, they're not there. Oh, it was there.
Yeah, no, the one I'm accessing doesn't have it, but I've
Okay.
trying to get the
Okay.
physical version.
Yeah, 'cause sorry, the digital team weren't online last night, so I've been trying to change it over.
I think that's probably, I was trying to be helpful because I thought it would be helpful as it was. You know, see ED21 here, or 21 something.
Yeah, we can.
The colour version. Okay. Anyway, well, the first thing is we can discuss any of all of those modifications, whatever the colour is, as we go. But I think it is true that I don't think all of them are making modifications, and therefore it's helpful to get the council's view about that. I just to clarify for the council, though, the ones that are yellow, which are additional minor modifications. Now, the definition of a minor modification or additional modification legislation is that they do not materially affect the policies that would be in the plans if it was adopted. The modifications, no other modifications, which is a rather complicated phrase, but it's a policy, including the ones that are modified. It can be modified. So, I think it would make these yellow ones to be planned when it adopts it. That's the minor ones.
Because reading your paper as well, the implementation text and the justification is not part of the main modification.
Well, they're not. You've clarified they're not policy.
Yeah.
I suppose the debate is if you change the implementation text, it isn't changing the policy, but some may say, well, it could materially affect the implementation of the policy because of the or whatever else is in the implementation text. So there is, it's not quite black and white. I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm looking at our legal advice. But
There are elements. I'm sure there are plenty that do amount to minor.
yes,
But anything that affects how the policy is applied, even if it's in the accompanying text,
yeah,
can affect the policy itself.
yes, yes. So it's not black. You can't just say everything that is a change to the plan isn't a change to the policy.
Yes.
Is automatically minor. I think that could be interpreted as. So I could
It's
even.
not required to look to the accompanying text when you're interpreting.
I mean,
sometimes
sorry.
that's
The legislation does make clear that if there's any inconsistency between policy and non-policy, the policy trumps it.
Yes.
Yeah. So insofar as there's an inconsistency, that doesn't matter. But it's just whether it's adding detail that is.
I'm not saying meaning if it suggests there's a definite how the policy is to be interpreted.
Yeah.
That could be quite tricky.
I mean, we had a bit of discussion early on, I think, that what you have in this plan as implementation text, other authorities could have published as supplementary planning documents, which the legislation, national policy, refers to not introducing new policy, but adding detail. So it's a bit of a grey area. I think it's helpful that you've gone through that exercise anyway, I'll bear it in mind, but it may be that I ultimately decide that some of these modifications here are needed, and actually they are part of a main modification rather than a minor one. But if you don't want to, your intention would be to make them minor.
Yes.
So people can feel reassured that if they think that's necessary in the plan,
Yeah.
that gives the council. Right, okay. Pink, the pink falling between the two different categories, they're ones that I think quite often ones that you agreed in the statement of common ground in regulating. You know, the first example, there's some detail about the Lee Valley Park. This is it's in the justification text. It doesn't look to me that it's essential soundness, but you also think it's not minor enough to be a minor one. I mean, it doesn't. I mean,
Is that the red one?
yes, the thing.
Yeah, so that we put it in the minor. I think that's best to put it in because it doesn't fall under the other minor. Falls under
Improvement
to the plan,
Yeah.
really. And that's what we read as the minor modifications that can be the plan.
Okay, right. So as I say, we'll use that schedule as we go through the discussion of this week and next, as far as they're relevant. We've got dates for when we go into the matters and the policies they're related. There may be some that relate to matters that we discussed the week one that we went on that very early schedule. I'm not sure there's any particular significance, but even if there is, there will be anything that I decide is a main modification. That will be subject to consultation before the end of the examination. So people will always have an opportunity to comment on them at that stage. Okay, so you've got that. Any questions or comments that people have about that? Just the last thing I'd say about it, it doesn't include the proposed modifications relating to tall building zones that were set out. They're all, I think they had a number of action points about tall buildings. Council's response to the week 2 action points in document ED19 sets out all of the proposed modifications related to tall buildings.
Yeah.
That supersedes anything earlier.
Yes, exactly.
Now, the reason you didn't include it in the schedule was
The reason why is because it was meant to be a discussion point,
Yeah.
and nothing's sort of agreed yet.
Yeah.
So we put some recommended discussion points
Okay.
for that particular
Yeah.
discussion point,
okay.
hearing, sorry. And then what we'll agree will then go to the schedule.
Okay. So they're in ED19,
Yes.
and that is everything relates to tall building that the council's put forward. I think what the council's saying, they're not necessarily saying themselves their main modification stage. They know we're going to look at that. And that discussion, I think, is tomorrow morning, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'll be here for that.
Okay. So you've got it. It's in ED19. Don't look for it because it's not there. It's not there. It's not because it wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate because it was a discussion point.
There's other agreement needed.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Okay. But it's all in one place. ED19 is what we will discuss tomorrow morning. Right, okay. Any other points, questions? No? Right, so let's move on to matter 5. Which is it's the housing inverse. This plan obviously is slightly different. The housing requirements policy H1, which we have a modification to, and the reason justification as well. That's in ED17, which was the ED17. It's the response to the week 1 action policy. Yeah. So that's all there, and it's also in the schedule color-coded. The policy is described as a main modification, changes text. Paragraphs 3174 and 3175 is described as minor. I may decide that actually it's all a main modification. And what is sometimes done actually is the modified policy and the reason justification that goes with it is treated as one main modification, and it just tweaks it all up. And it would avoid minimising the risk of legal challenge, I suppose, that people could say that you've made a change to the text. Anyway, don't want to touch back. So anyway, we've got that. And those, because this housing requirement and step trajectory and the way that the targets are expressed, which we've already discussed about in the earlier sessions, I don't want to go back over it all again, they're all based on capacity. So the figures that we've ended up with in here are the same figures as we're going to talk about what the identified capacity is in terms of the range, the top of the range and the bottom of the range. That's right.
Yes.
So, and actually, the trajectory reflects the trajectories for the different allocations and other sites with planning commission. So it's all, that's it. It's the requirements and the supply are one and the same. The bottom of the range being the base capacity that you assumed.
Yeah, and that's what the step trajectory is based on. The range, which we try to clarify in the implementation text and also the policy text.
Okay. So stepping back to what we have in the submitted plan, that had a base date of 2023 up to head to 2038 in terms of the supply and the requirements of the target. But that has been the supply information has been updated to the 1st of April 2025. So in effect, that renders the earlier figures out of date, not the latest information. So that then begs the question, well, what do you do with this latest information? And you say, well, we use it to recalculate the capacities and supply. It's essentially calculating the targets because they're based on the same thing. So what we have in terms of the supply was presented in 3 documents, I think. ED7, which is a statement of common ground in the GLA, which sets out ED8, which was the housing land supply performers, for the allocations and some other sites that contributed, I think, to 5-year supply. They were discussed, well, certainly for the allocations, we had those under Matter 4, so we used those when we talked about the capacity and the trajectory for each site. And then there's the ED9, which is an Excel spreadsheet, which sets out the 5-year housing land supply list of sites and trajectories for the 5 years from the 1st of April 2027. The reason for that being that's the proposed modification start date. So this is a very forward-looking plan. It looks ahead from the 1st of April following adoption, which ties in with what NDBF expects housing supply to be, and sets out requirements from that date onwards. We talked about that on one level back in I think, but there's still, I've got a few questions about what there's a bit of a gap between now and 1st of April 2027, and whether the plan actually says enough about that interim period, which is addressed to some degree in the text. Okay, so that's what we've got. So in terms of the supply information, as I say, the figures that you provided, they basically add up to the 45,611. That's the base capacity,
Yes.
and that's the bottom of the range on which the 5-year supply will be assessed. And then you've got this higher figure, which adds up to 53,954, which reflects a higher capacity than not all allocations, but some of the allocations.
Yeah, so that's like, I think it affects about 5 or 6 allocations from memory. Yeah, it's sort of the most optimistic delivery that we feel that we can achieve. So yeah,
And we talked about those in relation to the allocations.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could I just?
Yeah, so let's pause at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I just raise one point into.
Did you mind that on? Is it pressing on the top? I think the green line.
and there's a little button just.
Right in the middle
Hold
of
it
the top.
down. Hold it down.
That sounds
Probably
yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, really good point in relation to the back rates. My understanding is that the council has removed 200 units a year from major sites. And just to put down a mark, we discussed this perhaps once we go through your further question.
Yeah.
But to my mind, there is expectation of supply over the plan period. I think it's we've done some research looking at completed sites in the borough over the last decade or so. And while it's true that the numbers do exceed 200 units per year, on average it is around about 90, 200 mark. So I think we'd be seeking a recalculation of that supply in order to reflect what is a realistic estimate of how it's going to come forward based on the current allegations.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I was going to come on to that, and I will. I'll come back to it. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. It's a good point, and I will raise it in a minute. But just before I do, can I just deal with this issue about what I just said? So the plan would look forward from 2027. Modification to paragraph 3.174, which is the London plan target, which is embedded in the plan now up to the target. But the modification refers to the delivery up to 2025. That's what happened. So there's a shortfall between 2000 and 2025. That's referred to in the by text of 10,966. But then we jump ahead looking from 2027, so we've got another 2 years of what's happening with the London plan target, and the plan would be silent on that. But you do have a trajectory for that period, which you've included in here, and that shows again a shortfall against the London plan target. It was 2 years, 25, 27, yeah?
Yeah, and I think we'd be happy to make a further supporting text just to clarify what we would expect it to be.
Yeah.
Those 2 years, I guess, based on our
Yes. We'll come on to the implications of this shortfall and the way 5 year supply is calculated, etc., later this morning. But I think it would be helpful. So I think it would just complete that story about what this plan is doing. It's looking ahead to 2027, but it's also addressing the best it can what's happened against the number of targets since they came into effect back in 2019. Okay. Anything anybody wants to say about that at this point? I know you have an issue about the implication of that and how you calculate 5 year supply, which I'll come on to later. But in principle, you think if the plan clarifies what the trajectory says, I think that then it kind of fills that gap up to 2027 as best as it can be done. So, okay. Right. Okay. So back to the point you were just making. Yeah. The copies figures for the and and overall the lower capacity other figures for the allocations where there's been arranged. We discussed that. You said that you've now calculated for the whatever case where there's a higher figure based on well it removes a cap which was applied, you applied. Based on developers' expectations.
Yeah, no, the higher range trajectory, I mean, it kind of varies site per site, but it will either be based on design led capacity testing, which is higher than a commercial figure, or it's based on a commercial figure. I think one case that is higher than the trajectory, but we know that they're working with drafting and and yeah, so the key difference I think between the higher range and the lower range figure is the higher range is effectively what we think the most optimistic projection is for each of those sites, and then the lower range target figure is the lower range expectations for those 5 or 6 sites. So, for example, if they're dependent on coming to be delivered or things like that, we discussed last time round. And then also we are taking into account as well the fact that with 5 year land supply, there's an expectation that will provide an additional buffer of 20% as well. So effectively, we're looking at what the capacity is and how we think that might best be distributed across the 15 years to meet the 20% buffer. And then also, taking into consideration for the housing target, those lower range figures, if certain infrastructure wasn't delivered or certain bits of sites weren't.
So going back to the point about this, when you before the modification, you had applied this cap on delivery rates, is that right?
Yes. So when we submitted the plan, we did it based on a housing trajectory that applied not for absolutely every site, but the vast majority, we applied a cap of about 150 units a year for schemes after about that, and then 200 a year for schemes that were delivering more than 1,000 homes. And subsequent to that, we met with the GLA, discussed our housing trajectory, and the GLA advised us that we wanted to, look at developer delivery rates if they exceeded that 200 a year figure, and incorporate those into our trajectory to show that we're, trying to optimise development within the plan period. And so we went back and we looked at developer information that had submitted in planning applications, and that was the basis for calculating the revised housing trajectory, which is the latest version that we supplied you the figures that we put forward in our pattern paper.
So they are based on developer intentions.
Yes.
On the basis that, well, that's a reasonable assumption to make.
Yes.
And there weren't any what appeared to be unduly optimistic, delivery rates.
I don't think so, no. I mean, I think, some are a bit higher. I think perhaps the highest could be about 500 a year. I think Thames West from memory. So that is one of the considerably larger than the 200 homes we had per year previously. I think from what we've gathered from the discussions we had in the last set hearings, if at these sessions developers consider that those trajectories might change a little bit and to make those updates. But yeah, generally speaking, it's all based on information from developers when they submit their planning applications.
Okay. Right. Okay. Let's go back to AEIM on that.
Well, I think just a point of kind of principle. So I think it's important not to take faith in what developers said about anticipated build out rate, because that does tend to paint in honest to councils' housing trajectories, and this has been shown on many occasions where essentially a plan's been adopted only to see its trajectory fall over in year 1 or 2, simply because there is this optimism bias that's baked into the numbers. The way to kind of deal with that is to look carefully at what the number of units that have actually come through from sites historically, which is what we've done, and to essentially regress that figure back to an average of those historically completed sites. And as I say, lo and behold, in our analysis, we arrived at 180 units a year. It's perfectly true that there are a number of sites that do generate those historic sites that generate greater than 200 units. But for the most part, it's around that 200 or significantly less, which, as I say, produces an average coverage figure of about 180 units. And we think that it's appropriate that the council adopt a cautious and conservative and realistic approach, rather than simply taking developers' word, developers' assertion at face value. Because frankly, 500 units a year for any site is a very high build-out rate, just being realistic. So just simply saying so, that it would be sensible to apply an 180 build-out rate cap. If that isn't it, I suppose the reinstatement of the council's 200 units a year would be appropriate. I say this obviously because the site, the Abbey Mills site, is in a position to, if the council can be persuaded to, from its very conservative estimate of capacity, which is 596 units based on their design approach. We think that the master plan by Whittam Cox, expected from architects, foresees a capacity of at least 1,650 units. Now, that would go a long way to strengthen, in effect, the introduction of the build-out rate cap would take a significant number of units out of the council's supply, roughly units. Now, what we're in a position is to support the council in strengthening the supply with additional over over 1,000 units, what they'll end up with is a more robust, more realistic, more conservative trajectory that actually stands a good chance of being delivered in practice, and relying on capacity figures coming through from sites that we're very happy to assist the council in delivering.
Okay, thank you. When you refer to a historic average of 180, over what period do you calculate that? Right, so up to what, 2015, 25 or?
Yeah.
But if that has been a period of under delivery against London Pantomime, slow, delivery in London overall and in Newham as well, aren't you making that assumption previous under delivery, or would you say, well, it's not so much under delivery on individual sites, it's forward?
Well, these are simply the build-out rates that reflect market conditions at the time.
Yes.
So the caveat to our approach would be we can't actually recreate the market conditions that existed when this sample was taken. We assume that's going to those conditions will prevail over the plan period. But at least it provides a reliable benchmark on which to arrive at a plausible build-out rate assumption, which can then be applied to the trajectory. It's the best we have. It's the best source of evidence that we have available.
But by having a range, I mean, if you had a single figure, I could see you would need to exercise this sort of caution. But by having a range, doesn't it partly stress that? Because that's the point of the range. You've got a base position, which is the bottom of the range. And as the council said, there's a more optimistic view of how getting more capacity from the land that's identified.
Well, I think my understanding is that their 5-year supply, for example, is reliant on the lower figure. They're using the lower figure. So they're assuming that the lower figure will the need.
Well, that's the definition of the bottom. Yes.
So their assumption is that it's the fairest possible wins is the position they take. We're simply saying steady. We think that there is, you need to plan for adversity. Certain sites might not come forward at all. Certain sites are likely to come forward at a lower rate than is forecast. And let's be realistic. And after all, the framework does require that trajectory is realistic. Not that it's optimistic. Not that a fair wind can be assumed. But that's simply what we're saying.
Well, we'll come back to the 5-year requirement and 5-year supply. See if the council wants to respond to any of that.
No, I mean, only to say that I don't think that delivering over 500 units is in a single year is necessarily unrealistic. We've got multiple examples from previous years. Parcel Force, Phase 3 of the Canning Town Generation Area, Royal Wharf, Brunel Street Works, East Village, to name a few. And I think that's not necessarily unrealistic. And also, as everyone will be aware, the GLA is looking at further measures to try and incentivise delivery in the coming years. So we consider our 5-year supply as realistic.
The GLA is supportive of having an optimistic, realistic but optimistic, ambitious, whatever you want to call it.
I mean, it was an approach to phasing.
I'm just thinking about, I mean, if I'm asking to do this, but the AEIM refers to 180 as being an average, I think. Yes. Well, I think your average may be, I don't know what your average is, but what you're saying is it doesn't have to be that average, it has to be a cap.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, if it would be like, we'd effectively be phasing the development over the period that the developers consider is realistic to deliver. So if it is 500 units, the developer has indicated that the scheme will deliver in 10 years. So we've taken the total delivery and divided it equally over that time.
Yes, yeah, sure.
It's easy to reel off a number of sites that deliver more than 300 units. I can also reel off sites. I won't do this now, but I can reel off sites where the build-out rate has been significantly less than 200 units on sites of capacity of 1,000 plus homes. So the point about the average, it's a conditioning tool that can be used to introduce a sense of what is a realistic expectation, given the capacity of a certain time, given the developers do to be bullish in their and tell the council what they want at the end in terms of an expected build-out rate. We should row that back to something which is to an average which is that has been achieved in the past, the similar kind in this location.
You referred, I think, to if you did apply the cap of 180 or 200, you would take around 5,000 units off the council's supply.
Yeah, this is based on the council's latest figures set out. Yes. Yes, so it's working from the figure set out in document EWS 026A.
Yeah.
My understanding is that the council expects between 2025-6, 2041-2, 48,012 units to come forward from the board sites. Now, if we apply a cap of 180 units to that figure, to large sites of 500 units, that would produce 5,853 units from that figure, 2012.
So that figure, it would take
5,853 units out of supply over that period.
just based on the maths of how many sites there are units.
Yeah, so what we've done is take sites with a capacity of 500 plus units, applied a cap of 100 units. So where, for example, there's a build-out rate the council has used 500 units, we changed that to 180 and applied that through the build-out period. And the effect of doing that in sites, i.e. sites that have a build-out rate in excess of 180 units, is to see a reduction in the overall supply over a period 25-26, 41-42 of 5,853 units.
Okay, do you agree with that figure?
I haven't done that, so I can't really speak to the accuracy of the figure. What I would say as well with Newham as well, we are dealing with a lot of very large complex sites, which are primarily comprised of taller buildings. So, perhaps a single site delivering a higher delivery than 180 units per year wouldn't necessarily be unrealistic. Lots of tall buildings perhaps in a single year. So it does mean that, it's not areas where there will be smaller sites where it will be gradual delivery over time. Delivery of large blocks during the year.
I think the bottom line, sir, is it sounds it's possible, but is it realistic?
Yeah.
And that is all we're really saying, especially as the original build-out rate was 200, which we consider is more realistic than saying 500. I mean, it's really, as simple as that.
I was interested to see that the difference would be as large as about 5,800. Of course, that is still above the minimum requirement. I mean, if you didn't have a range at all, your figure would be correct. It would be 46.
Yeah.
Really, this comes down to, does it not, as an indication for the calculation of the 5-year supply? I mean, you may take issue with basing the 5-year requirement on the bottom range, which we'll come on to.
So
Yeah.
The council have gone for the kind of brief. Yeah, it hovers around by
Look at the figures in it, but yeah.
and I don't think that's a very sound, sensible approach. I think they ought to work harder to encourage and strengthen supply coming from individual sites, so that it's a good position.
The trouble with the cost is that we'll come on to this again. We've had this discussion. The plan doesn't make any policies about how many units there will be on any site, other than it seeks to optimise it through a design-led approach. Which again is the context for why that's why we've got a rate. We want to optimise.
Well, for the purpose of building with the trajectory and the market supply, you do need to arrive at a certain set of numbers. And obviously, the point about soundness does rely to a degree on the robustness and reliability of those figures. So I think the judgment does need to be made as to whether those figures are robust.
Yeah.
And we're simply saying that in order to achieve that, closer to that position, we think that certain guardrails should be placed around the council's approach, one of which is to apply an evidence-based build-out rate cap citing report. At least because there is ample opportunity, certainly on our side, to go a long way in actually making up any shortfall in either the well, it's obviously the capacity-based figure, to strengthen the number, to increase the number of votes that come forward, and to council responsibility for the largest others.
So obviously, the heart of our position is we don't understand why there are constraints from our side, and that's why we're seeking to.
Yes.
So ultimately, help the authority to get there, and it is the capacity of our side that we've been promoting.
Well, I am probably do it now. I'll come back to the issue about the advantage and disadvantage of putting any capacity figures at individual sites. Because thinking about what you've just been saying and all of that, if was pointed to the difficulty of having a meaningful figure because of this design-led approach of seeking optimising capacity. So the consequence of putting figures in for say your site actually counterproductive, mightn't it? Because at the moment the plan is not putting any limit on other than through the policies related to design, tall buildings, etc. Yeah. It's not capping anything on the site. So long as those policy requirements are justified and appropriate, it would allow your site to deliver the 1,600 that you say it can do, as opposed to the 600 or whatever the council's capacity is to be given.
As long as the policy does allow.
Absolutely.
And that's obviously for tomorrow.
Yes. Or whatever it is. Well, a number of times. We're looking at the policy for the site again. And right.
Yeah. So that
yes,
we understand. I think it's just that it's. I suppose it's the assumptions that have been made about our site we disagree with.
Yes, of course. The assumptions about the numbers or the assumptions about the policy requirements.
Well,
both.
In effect, the design constraints.
Yeah. We'll come back to that.
But obviously we're interested on that. So.
Okay. So again, had this discussion, I think most people agree that it was actually helpful for the plan to not put figures into sites. Is nodding here. You had a different view. I think you were the only one that expressed that different view. So just tell me again, from your point of view, what the position is and why it should be maintained as it is, that not figures to sites.
Yeah, I mean the figures that we design capacity tested for the sites is just one way that you could deliver policy requirements on those site allocations, and we primarily use them to inform our trajectory and kind of understand what our housing target is. It's not about placing a capital that can be delivered on those sites. And as you sort of pointed out previously, I think if you were to include a figure within the site allocation text, it might create expectations about what that site can deliver, and actually it could deliver more than what the design and capacity testing for you've done. Indicates it can deliver.
So even if it's expressed, we couldn't really express it because it is the design approach, but if it included a figure, it could have that effect of acting as a gap on that site, which I understand. I think it comes back to some extent this three-dimensional element of the spatial strategy, because there's more variables out there about how you can achieve these figures. And I think also evident from how remarkably different some of the examples that you've had where you've had a capacity figure and then you've had a developer planning commission or whatever else. Your site's another example of that, isn't it? Okay. Anything?
No, I mean, you've had opposition. What we don't want is the constraint, however that is.
Yes, that's right.
So if there is no figure, there is no figure. Our concern is about constraining what can be delivered at site.
Yes. Okay, right. Well, we'll look at it in two ways, won't we? In terms of the figures. The policies for your site, at least tomorrow, in terms of tall buildings and the changes that the council proposed, both to the policy and also to the map, which actually, I will mention that as well. There is you will have seen, I think, the response to the action points where the council describes changes to the zone boundaries and building heights, therefore the colour of the lines on the map. Yeah, but a very nice version of it's not the policy map, is it? The map, tall building zone map, was published yesterday. So we see that.
Yes.
ED21.
Yes.
So those of you who are here tomorrow, that's what we're talking about. So anyway, going back to your site, that's one thing, and then we are going on week one to talk about the council's proposed modification to the site allocation policy as an action point for week one, which is also to see.
Yeah, I apologise that I was unable to get a response to your further questions by the 19th of January.
I did see them.
If, however, literally I've just written it over the last 2 or 3 of the weekend, which is what I'm working from today. If you're interested to see that document and the evidence around the average build-out rate, I'm very happy to share that with you and share it.
Leave that with me and I'll have a think about it. So you're talking about what you were talking about earlier about the cat. So I haven't been that. Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, let me think about that. Whether right. Right. So unless there's anything else people want to say most generally, I'm going to go through the different components of the supply, which were the allocations, the sites with permission, etc. Reforms. So before I do that, is there anything else anybody wishes to say on the sort of more general? No? So in terms of the assumptions about allocations, obviously, as I said, we talked about each one individually. We had the pro formas which set out the trajectory. We've been through those. We've talked about the plan, having figures or not having figures. So is there anything else that anybody wishes to say about the figure or the figures for the allocations? Brings me on to windfalls. So the latest trajectory which we've been talking about, I think includes a total of 9,788 for the two elements of windfall, which is the small site allowance and the windfall allowance. Is that right?
Yeah.
And that's separate figures. Small site allowance and the windfall.
Mainly for, well, they're all from the 2017 SHAR, I think, and that's
Yeah.
a much smaller component. They're mainly from SHAR.
Maybe.
They're mainly from the 2017 SHAR.
Yeah. So, so that if you add that up to 9,788, and you average, I know they vary in the trajectory, but if you average it over the modified plan period, it would be an over average about 575. Is that something about right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's taking it as a broad number over a period of time. Obviously, NPPF talks about compelling evidence, reliable sources of supply, and regard to the SHAR, storage delivery, and expected future trade. So we talked about the SHAR, we talked about storage delivery 575. And we've got the figures that you provided, and the extent to which these are, I mean, they're not, but they average out small sites 319, and other windfall 262.
Yeah, sorry, I've got in my response to 5.4
Yeah.
to 5, I've done a table that sets out our expectations on small sites delivery. So it's the average of 380 a year for the small sites.
Yeah.
I've done on that target, and then for the other windfalls over the full 15-year period for the plan. Assuming that we move it on slightly, it's an average of about 220 per year for the other windfall sites, which is basically the SHLAR 2017 sites. But those are all phased for our trajectory purposes in the long-term period of the trajectory.
Yes. In terms of looking at the past again, past completions through 2014 and 2024. Total windfalls about 580.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So if we're looking ahead, overall long-term average about 575. Past 10 years, 580. They're broadly in the line.
Yeah. So the projected 602 a year average is pretty similar to 581. I think that we've got for historic delivery on windfalls.
Okay. Right. So picking up on some of AEIM's points. First of all, past completions, pick out an outlier, as you put it, 1,062 particular year. If you took that out, you recalculated and got different.
Yes, I think in truth, to be fair to council, there was obviously the figure of 9 in financial year 22-23. So I'm happy to withdraw that objection. Okay. They do vary quite much. If you look at that table, and the long-term average over 10 years, whatever it was. Okay. And you made some other points about the London plan target, it's small set allowance. So whether it's legitimate to use that when you're not using the London plan target overall. Yes. Well, I think the council just moved its position to standard, and then now actually using the London plan target, the overall London plan target. Therefore, I think it is legitimate to use the 380 figure. So again, I think that falls away. So in terms of very broadly then, if you look back at the past, this 580 or so figure, and you look at what the plan is assuming over the 15-year period, is 600 a year, they're not out of kilter, are they? They're not. I suppose the only query, I have on the actual criticism was that if you're using another local plan that I've had anything to do with, the windfall allowance is expressed as one line in the trajectory, straightforward, it's easy to understand. There are obviously two lines. I can't understand failing small sites and windfall treating them as synonymous terms. So if they are small sites, if the 380 is being used as the windfall allowance, why then is there this additional thing? Not least because there are a number of sites, identified sites, that are of less than 25 hectares in size. So I think it would be worth just sort of tidying up that aspect of the plan, that aspect of the supply spreadsheet.
So there's some, looks like there's some double counter overlap between the allowance for the 380 and the council's way of calculating the windfall allowance. Going back to the 380, I mean, that goes back to quite an old Schlaf, London-based, wide range Schlaf, isn't it?
Yes, it does, 2017.
And the reason, I mean, I suppose I do find confusing and think about it in the future when people look back and try and use this plan and what we assumed. Would it be easier to have an overall windfall allowance? And justification for that is explained in terms of it incorporates a small site allowance from the London plan, but it also.
I think I disagree, but maybe it's kind of a work of the difficulties of monitoring a borough like Newham, where there is such a high level of delivery that we're seeing year on year. Monitoring small sites below 0.25 hectares aligns with the London plan. It also means that we can focus our trajectory monitoring on the largest contributors to which makes resourcing from the council's perspective a lot easier. The difference as well is the windfall that is in small sites is there are 2017 Schlaf sites that are bigger than 0.25 hectares. And the reason why there is an ever so slight amount of overlap between these small sites figure and what's in the trajectory is because we, as a council, like to monitor what's being delivered on site allocations and what's being delivered on specialist housing within their individual roads in the trajectory. You have to apply a ratio to specialist housing, so it's difficult to segregate it from that broader windfall figure. And yeah, the strategic sites, I just want to see what's coming across them. But it's a very small level of overlap. I think it's, I haven't got the calculation to hand. I don't think, oh no, I do actually. It's homes in the individual roads and the trajectory that are on small sites, but that is, in the broad like scale of our housing trajectory, that is a very, very small figure. And it's purely, it's for me, it's the most sensible way to on this trip.
The point about that would be an offer for a definition size of market. So if we actually identify these sites, perhaps not describe them as windfall, describe them as they belong in the trajectory, they belong as identified sites within the trajectory. So why not treat that in confusion about the definition?
I think the definition of windfall is a site that's not allocated in. So if you're going to allocate all these very small sites, all these large sites, windfalls, they're not under the NPN.
Is it fair? Okay. I mean, I would, there's also a sentiment on the council there can understand it.
Well, the definition is what it is, which is that then the NPN also talks about when you taking account of Schlaf as well as past future trends. I think all the council does continue that.
We're not challenging the
No.
it's bigger than that.
Well, I think I understand. And so just to be very clear, I mean, the allowance is Schlaf sites on top of 380. The 380 is based on the small 0.25 or less.
Yeah.
And the other windfalls pick up a few of those, but they're that small number of them, most of them in 380 because they are 0.25.
Yeah, exactly. So the other small sites, they're higher, they're larger, 5 hectares, which is why we. Whereas it's also helpful for our monitoring of how many small sites we're delivering year on year compared to the 380 small sites. So
The just remember what the Newham says about the school site allowance. What's talking about allowance?
No, it's just that they only, in the long plan, it's only a disaggregated like small sites target. There's no like
Yeah.
windfall equivalent sites.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on? No. Right. That brings us on to the next category, which is the sites with conditional resolution to grants. Obviously, there's an overlap of this with the allocation. So the extent to talks about the allocations, many of which have got permission. There's some others that aren't allocations. And I think the number of those that we're talking about, actually, but
Yes, they are. So the ones that aren't allocations are probably their sites from our adopted local plan, like site allocations that have mainly like they're at a substantial stage of delivery. So we didn't reallocate them in the new plan.
and you've got this category of resolutions to grant. We talked about this briefly previously, and you said that in Newham, these vast majority of these historically have been to permission. Yeah. So there's a total of over 4,000 site homes on site. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we're going to go on to the assumptions about 5-year supply, which are the deliverable ones, and where the clear evidence is. Just in terms of overall, which I think the main issue here is about whether any lapse rate should be applied for the supply for the planned period, or not generally, because I'll come on to the 5-year supply. Just generally. The HBF, unfortunately, couldn't make it today. They, in responding to my question, they referred to a GLA report in 2024 identifying 300,000 homes in London, I think, with unimplemented planning permissions. Some applications, or some speculative, that rate should be applied. But you say very few permissions maps getting built.
Yeah, exactly. So certain individual permissions may lapse, but normally that means that a developer will come back for a revised scheme. These are, usual finding. We do have about 388 schemes that haven't done that, which we've included in the long-term plan period, but that's about sort of looking at the context of order, delivery across the plan period. That's about 1% of the overall delivery. So we don't think in that would be necessary to include.
Yeah.
Again, in the interests of providing a reliable forecast of supply, in relation to sites with resolution to grant, these obviously aren't planning permissions. The definition of deliverable are category B sites, and we think that modest 10% assumption that these 10% of these sites won't forward as planned is appropriate. Just to say, providing a reliable, robust, and cautious assessment of future forwards. That would just apply not to the whole trajectory, but just to those with a resolution, the sites with the resolution grant.
That's another one.
Both those with a planning permission and with the resolution grant.
There were 10% of both. So, well, I'll say I'll come up with what's assumed the 5-year supply in a minute, but were you saying that would apply for the whole period? You could push it back 50%. That would be come out of the supply altogether, or more of a 5-year supply?
The 10% should be applied as a deduction across the country from supply.
No, the council say, well, even if these sites do lapse, the chances are at some point in the future another application on it.
Well, there may or may not. I think the kind of do they have evidence to demonstrate that's the case? Or do we take them at their word? I think the fraction of the lapse rate, the 10% lapse rate, which has been used, as I say, by other in other local plan examinations, is that it is a very similar to the build-out rate average, simply a means of putting guardrails around supply, sets for something which is realistic as to danger being of being overly optimistic, realised in reality. I think what I would say is, certainly with the resolution to grant, there is an intrinsic risk. If it is as a planning commission, there's an intrinsic risk that it might not come forward. There's a higher risk that it might come forward than if it's a planning commission. So it feels intuitively appropriate to use that as a device. And as I said, it's been used elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Or used to sort of savings to start having sort of meeting the definitions and developing new deliverables. Okay. So I think we'll come on to the 5-year plan in supply. I think just before we do our numbers, we'll celebrate 20 minutes, come back at 11, and this is the last item on the agenda for this morning, so we'll do the supply 5-year period. Okay, so we'll have a break now. Okay, it's it's after 11, so we will resume now, if we could, please. And on to the 5-year housing land supply. Before we talk about supply, we need to speak about the requirement. So I think this agreement on the 5-year period being this period in the future, which is where national policy takes us these days. Well, really. So we're looking at a deliverable supply from the 1st of April 2027, based on information that we have at the moment, which obviously is not, well, it runs into date, but the planning commission is the most up to date we've got, which is up to date, which is 2025. So that's what we're working with. You're all familiar with the NPPF and PPG definition of deliverable, and where the burden of proof lies in terms of clear evidence for that. So we'll come on to looking at the supply shortly, but in terms of the requirements, obviously we've got a stepped trajectory, and we've got a range, and we've got a buffer. Various things we can argue about, I think. The PPG, just to remind what the PPG, it does deal with these issues. It talks about whether there's a step trajectory, you use that for calculating your 5-year requirement, meaning that it will be different at different times of the plan period. So that's the first thing. It does also refer explicitly to where a range has been justified. We use the lower end of the range, and that's what the council have done. So I think what you were saying, it fits with those two things in the PPG. In terms of the buffer, I've completely lost track of these days, so many different variables, but you're using a 20% buffer, which seems to me that's a higher buffer as NPPF, PPG refers to, for whatever reason. That's what you need. Do I need to know the reason? Which category of 20% you fall within?
Yeah, no, it would be 20% because of our delivery test.
80,000 delivery tests. Yeah. And it may fall in with the other one about from 2026 onwards if you've got an adopted plan based on the old method and it's less than 80% of standard method. You probably don't even know what standard.
Yeah, I think that's like, isn't that in the emerging? I can't remember.
Anyway, you're using 20%, so it's as high a buffer as I think could be applied. So based on all that, you've calculated using the step trajectory for that first period, the targets, and it ends up as 20,575. Yeah. So that's the London target for 2 years, then your capacity-based target for 3 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the 20% added to that.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Okay, understood. Do you want to?
I don't think we're proposing to challenge that.
Okay.
I've run the numbers, and I think what the council is doing is to ensure that over the 5-year period, they are making some inroads into the substantial London plan backlog against the London plan target, which I think GLA obviously in the statement of ground has supported on. Music, I think that you're supportive of that too. So I think we're not going to.
No, okay. Okay, so the requirement it includes 2 years of the high London plan target, and then it goes to capacity based. As I said, so it's and I talked earlier about the plan acknowledging what this accumulated unmet need. Well, no, it's not unmet need as such, is it? Because the London plan targets themselves aren't need; they are capacity based in their own way, in a different.
Yes.
But anyway, that's what it is. And the plan would acknowledge that there will have been a total shortfall against that target by 2027 of whatever thousands it is.
Yeah.
What the implications of that will ever be for development, I don't know. There'll be another London plan coming along soon, won't there, with another target in it, so who knows.
I suppose the only thing I would say is that it makes it all that the trajectory is robust, because there is despite the non-planned targets being capacity based, nevertheless there they are.
Yeah.
They're in the London plan, and I think they do provide some benchmark as to what is deemed to be appropriate and essentially meeting London's housing needs. So I think there is a responsibility on the council to take those targets seriously, and given the looming backlog that's emerged over the last sort of few years, I think it's really important that the council is doing everything it possibly can to meet that, to address that backlog, including, as I say, taking as liberal and as supportive position as possible in relation to their allocated sites, which ours, of course, is one.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, yes. Okay. Whatever the numbers are, the key thing about this plan is that it is as positive as it can be in maximising or optimising capacity on all of the land that it identifies through its three-dimensional approach. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That's helpful. Anything else on the 5-year requirement? On the requirement side before we look at
yes, it is a requirement, and it's primarily just to do with probably the big elephants in the room, and knowing that London Plan is coming forward back to the report pretty early. I noticed, well, I say early, not early, but early in the 5-year supply base GLA in there, starting to stand the common ground, do raise the flag and say, well, we know our housing target is going to go up to 88,000 homes per annum. And that's likely to change housing targets across London. So it doesn't say it, but the question be prepared. And I think the question is how do we deal? I mean, it's a very difficult situation for the borough to find itself in, but we know a situation where housing targets are going to significantly rise. Probably in the first, I mean, London Plan saying that they were aiming to jobs, I think in 28, 29. But that has changed once at least. And it's just how then the supply targets reacts to that. Is that a review at that stage? Because the change, I mean, we don't know what this will mean for Newham, because the 88,000 is London-wide. The expectation is all London boroughs will, by different magnitudes. But it's the interplay between that new target, which is definitely coming. They'll be very clear that that target is coming. And then how that plays with the 5-year housing mass supply trajectory, which probably will well short of that target to that point.
So when that London Plan is adopted, it will set a new target for Newham.
Yes.
So the 5-year requirement at that time will be calculated on that, will it? I don't know.
Yes, it would. So when the new London Plan target is adopted, it will supersede the local plan target. I mean, I provide some assurances that the new target is informed by the new SHLA that London are doing, and we have fed into that from the outset. We've put in our design and capacity testing figures into that SHLA process to inform the capacity that's coming forward on that, and also that's going to be looking at a wider range of land than it would previously done, where a lot of development was focused on brownfield land. It will now be a mix perhaps of brownfield and grey belt, so there might be perhaps more delivery perhaps from other boroughs that have more available grey belt. So yeah, I think it's difficult to predict at this point what that target might look like with any certainty.
Yeah, but I suppose it's just another, it's unlikely that Newham's target will go down from this plan's figures.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's the same message really, isn't it? That this plan needs to be as positive and it can be about optimising delivery on the land that it is identified.
I think it is almost impossible to ask current, because how do you predict something that hasn't been said?
Yeah.
But I think it's the scale of shift of that number. It's quite a significant magnitude. I mean, if you compare it to existing London Plan targets, it's another third. Well, that's 53,000 up to 88,000. It's a very substantial. So the scale of change for individual boroughs in some parts of London could be quite significant.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Yes, you're right. The follow-up point is probably the thing you've heard all too often from us, is that that means we do need to bear that in mind in the policy formulation, particularly the financial policies.
Thank you. Yes, so William.
Just to echo that, I think my understanding is that the 88,000 figure in the new London plan is based on the standard methodology, so that's needs based rather than capacity based. So I think for policy H1, that sort of draws attention to that higher figure, and I think the amendments that have been made to policy H1 are really helpful. They talk about optimisation. Whether there's scope for that to be strengthened further, I mean, the MPPF, the consultation version, talks about housing targets needing to be exceeded, and it uses the word exceed. And we've seen other local plans, the Lewisham local plan, which was only adopted in July, have similar wording to what you've included in your policy, but it does say ensure the London plan target is met and the MPPF 15-year target is exceeded. Something along those lines, just to really sort of emphasise that, you know, you're not aspiring for the lower figure, you are aiming high, because we know that this shift is coming.
Right, so we then move on to the supply that has been identified. The council, it's all set out in a list of sites in document ED9. Yes, so that's got it's a spreadsheet. Which if you print it's too small for me to but I've got it here, so we can go down that as we need to if necessary. But it's they've categorised in the basically the NPPF definitions of deliverable in terms of where the clear evidence needs to be in terms of proving it. So of the 22,113, I think there's 4,255 with detailed planning permission. But there's more than that actually out there, because there's 794 without planning permission or a hybrid. Parts of those have got full permission, detailed permission. That's another 4,370.
So yes, correct.
So that's a total of around 8,500 that have got full permission that you can assume are deliverable.
Yeah.
So it's the remaining 14,000, 13,000 or so.
Yes.
Where there needs to be clear evidence. Yeah. Which brings us back to what we talked about, the trajectories for each of those sites. So they're all listed. We've got a trajectory for each. We talked about the ones that are allocations. People have referred to some on this list, which I'll pick up in a minute. There aren't allocations, but there are commissions or did have commissions, whatever. So that's where we're at. So insofar as the clear evidence there is for these, you provided these pro formas for each of these sites, on this list, including the ones that aren't allocations.
Yeah.
And that summarises what the evidence is.
Yeah.
And it's all based on what's been provided by developers, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what we've got. The council position, that is clear evidence, justifies it. We've got the list. I'm going back to where AEIM, two issues, I think. Some specific sites that it mentions, which it says permissions that are on sites on here that have actually not got permission or permission has lapsed. There's at least two there. One was this 302 to 312 High Street. You say that it's listed on here with permission, but you say permission was refused and dismissed on appeal.
Yes, that's the intelligence that we have.
Okay, I'll let the council come back on these in a minute. Then there's one that's listed on here with permission called Glory House, which you say will lapse next month.
That's the information that we have, yes.
Yeah, okay, fine. You then refer to two others, one at Folkestone Road, one at Odelia Court, which have lapsed, but I can't see those on this list. So
Yeah, so I think the point we're making there, sir, was that they appeared in the council's previous edition of their 5-year supply. And we were making the point that the council does have a tendency to include sites that, with planning permission, that actually go on to not come forward. So there is a flaw there, I think, arguably, in the council approach. And I think that part of my hearing statement builds the argument towards the lapse rate. So we're simply providing examples of where sites that are included in the 5-year supply don't actually come forward, therefore reinforcing the argument that a lapse rate of 10% should be high.
Although I think what the guys said before, like, yes, that does happen, but then another application will be put in on these sites and it will happen.
Yeah. I think the Home Builders Federation have identified this sort of, collective figure of 300,000.
Yeah.
Now there is some source for that. So clearly some sites have failed to come forward at all. Some sites are delayed. Some sites do come back. But overall, lapse is a phenomenon. And it's a question of how you reasonably reflect that in terms of any sort of forecast for supply.
Well, I think for 5-year supply, the NPPF is reasonably big. I mean, they're meant to be specific deliverables. So we're not talking about, well, I've got pitfalls in here, but we're talking about specific. So we can go through each one of these and look if it's got permission. It's clear evidence that it won't come forward, which you're saying, well, the clear evidence here is it's had permission for so many years and it's about to lapse and there's no sign of anything happening. Yeah. That would be your argument, would it?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, okay, fine. Okay, understood. What about High Street then? This permission that was refused and appeal dismissed, dismissed with permission?
There was recently an appeal dismissed on that site, but it did have permission before that. So I believe the appeal is in relation to a new site for a new permission, for additional height. And that was subject to a refusal and appeal, and the appeal was dismissed, but there was a baseline permission.
So this one here that you've listed, 23000456 full.
Yes,
that's the one. That's the extant planning permission.
I believe so. Yes. So
not implemented. Didn't we talk about this site in relation to? Is it Stratford?
It is in Stratford. Yeah, I don't think they've attended the hearing sessions though. I guess what I would also say to some of these sites that are due to lapse in the next month or two, the way we do starts completions is that we will go and check to see whether those sites have lapsed in August as part of the starts completions exercise. So even if a site has lapsed in the past financial year, we would go and check that in August of the following year just to make sure whether or not it has lapsed or not. So at that point, we'd update the trajectory of what hasn't lapsed.
And we're working with the permissions at 1st of April 2025.
Yes.
I mean, starting to roll forward what we know now, it's a little bit dangerous because you do a partial update to this, haven't we? I mean, we're taking this as a full set of data now. Okay. Right, okay. Now, the other thing, going back to what you mentioned earlier about delivery rates and the 5-year supply. So I'm looking on this list here then, the Excel spreadsheet, and I've found 13 sites going down this list that have got annual figures over 200. Okay?
Yeah.
And of those, 8 of the figures only in 1 year. So does that not mean that if it was slower, like I say, over 2 years rather than 1, it would still contribute to the 5-year supply?
It would indeed.
So that doesn't matter in those cases. No.
I mean, remember the adjustment to the bill-out rate applies to sites with capacity of 500 units or more. So sites that are less than that capacity are, we don't have a problem.
Okay, well, I'm focusing particularly on the 5-year supply.
Yeah. Because
the test for the rest of the supply is whether they're developable, and then, which is a lower bar, isn't it?
Sure.
But your point would be, well, it may be developable, but how much they'll deliver by 2042, you're saying, be optimistic, but okay. But that's quite a long way into the future.
Yeah, no.
So I'm focusing on these, right? Yeah. So I think you've accepted that of the 13 that have got higher than 200, 8, it doesn't matter because we could just spread it over in 2 years or 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, we've identified sort of 3 sites where we think that the anticipated build-out rate is unrealistic.
Right, let's go through that. So I've got 4.
Land at Thameside West.
Yes, so we've got allocation N2 SA4, Thameside West, 500 a year for several years.
Yes,
so that's
suggesting that the cap can be applied to that site,
Okay.
either the 180 or the council's 200.
Yeah.
Village, East Village.
In which allocation is that? Sorry.
So I just got some notes here.
Which number line on the spreadsheet is it? East Village. Oh, I see. Oh, that's just in 1 year. This one. This is 202.
No, I need to get the data in front of me. Apologies, I've just got a summary.
That assumes 202 in 1 year.
East Village is 18.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that one.
Okay.
The other one is Stevenson Street.
Yeah, I've got that one. So that's the allocation. This is the N7 SA2 12 Trees Park Bromley Road Gasworks. So this has the 239 in for the 5 years. Yeah.
I think bear in mind that's a site that's already under construction.
Yeah.
It has been for some time.
So it's your evidence that the council's used on the 239 and you think that's...
Yeah.
Yeah. When you say it's under construction, what's been built?
Phase 1 is complete already. I think they're commencing phase 2. So it's, yeah, I'd say it's sort of in full flow, should we say.
Okay. And that figure is 239 is...
That's what's been provided to me by the client. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then we've got Beckton Riverside, 200. That's again.
Yeah.
Yeah, 200 else. Yeah.
Yeah, and we provided adjusted figures for that. Actually bringing it down from the original assumptions that the council had around the delivery for Beckton Riverside, because it's got resolution to grant, it's an outline, so there's going to be quite a long lead in before we can start delivery. So in the 5-year period, we said rather than the 3,000 homes that we've got planning for, it would more likely be 606 homes.
Right, and that's the figure that's in there.
And that's what they have, yeah.
Then we've got the Silvertown Keys, 294. This is N2 SA1. Is that one of the ones? Yeah, that was the ones you were going to pick up. This is line 41.
Here we go.
Yes, so we would suggest that cap should be applied to that site.
That one, yeah. So the Thameside West and the Silvertown Keys, 294.
Incidentally, the East Village sites.
Yeah.
Is line 26.
Yeah, I've got it.
Data that I have.
It's what, sorry?
Yeah, it's line 26. Data that I have, with 848 units anticipated. And then curiously, just supplying in 2 years of the 5-year period, 409 and 439.
Let me get this. Which road was it? East Village Road 30 or
30, I think.
Yeah.
There's two East Villages.
Yeah, I know.
Had confusion.
Yeah.
So yeah,
The
there's
Chobham Farm.
Yes, I've got the East Village with the 409 and the 439. Yeah?
yes.
Yes, that's the one you're raising. Yeah, sorry. Go on. Sorry, what's the...
Well, simply that it'd be interesting to know how that very sort of obviously very chunky trajectory was come up with. But yeah, it looks implausible, and we suggest that a cap should be applied.
Okay. Do you want to do it? Is it
Yeah.
2 blocks or something?
Yeah, it's 2 blocks. Yeah, according to my notes anyway that I've in the trajectory. Yeah, it's 2 blocks. So we split it over the amount of units in those 2 different blocks accordingly. Thameside West and Stevenson Street. We've had updates with the developer as part of the last set of hearings that we've noted down. And if you want to update the trajectory in line with the developer assumptions, we would, that's the approach we usually take. And Silvertown Keys again is another site allocation. We discussed it last year at the hearings, and there was no change suggested to the trajectory, I believe, for that site. my memory is.
Sorry, what did you say about Thameside West? That 500 reflects their latest.
So no, it doesn't. No.
Right.
So this is the trajectory that we prepared before we had that
Yeah,
set of
yeah,
hearings.
yeah.
So we hadn't had that like updated data at that point.
Oh, that's right. Yes, that's Sorry, I've got that. I noted that. I was going to ask you about it.
No.
They suggested 1,200
Yes.
more likely, didn't they, than the 2,500?
Yeah.
So that would be. Yeah. Okay. So that's one from your.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the spillage side is concerned, so what the council is assuming is that they can take the developer at their word that these two very large blocks of 409 and 439 units will come forward in 1 year consistently. And I just don't think that's realistic.
When you say come forward, it's not to be built in the year, is it? It's when it's completed.
Well, what this suggests is that those units would be completed in locality within that financial year.
It could start the year before. The building could start before, couldn't it? Doesn't the figure record when it's completed?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, yeah, when the block is delivered, and the units are available for sale.
Yeah.
I mean, very often, obviously, with a new commercial development, residential development, the developer will be looking to sell units as soon as possible, and will release tranches of units into the market, and that's the sort of rationale for having the delivery spread over a number of years. What this is indicating is that the block could start. It would be completed and completely sold within that 1 year.
But if some are sold in advance of completion, is that what you're saying? It's normal practice. They're sold off plan.
Well, okay, so
it's not about sales, is it? This is about when the building's completed, isn't it? And then all of them would be completed at the time.
Yeah, yes, but I mean, the block of this size is likely to consist of more than one building, and the developer will be looking to sell those units as soon as they are completed in order to support their business model.
Yeah.
So the expression in the 5-year supply of all these units being released into the market, building being complete and released into the market in the same year is unrealistic in my view. And we're not suggesting that no sites would come forward. No units would be completed. Absolutely not. We're simply saying that 180 for a site of this size, 180 units spread over those 4 years of the supply would be an appropriate adjustment in the interests of arriving at a conservative view.
But that would end up with the same result, same contribution to the 5-year supply, wouldn't it?
Well, in that particular case, possibly. But what we're doing is to take each of the candidate sites, each of the sites with the capacity of 500 units, apply the cap indiscriminately, whether it makes a difference to the overall 5 years.
Yeah, but I think that illustrates the logic. I'd rather focus on. I mean, you could split the figures over the 5 years, and it would be 180, and then the problem go away.
In this particular case,
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's focus on the ones where, as I said, the ones where you can't. The ones that are problematic. Thameside West, 500. You put it down to 250 or something. If you go with Silvertown Homes.
Yeah, we haven't made the trajectory yet. So
No.
I mean, if that's what the developer says the rate's going to be, that's the logic that's applied to all the other sites. So we put that in.
Okay.
I would say as well, just on a small point, I mean, I've listed them before, but we do have lots of sites where they do deliver more than 200 homes in a year. Like Royal Wharf, they were delivering over 1,000 units in a year in some instances. So it's not unheard of in Europe.
Okay, well, we've got St Williams. You've looked at the two that were on the list. That you're saying you're sticking by that. Silvertown Keys we talked about. They didn't say anything different. Thameside West, they did say something different. You've noted that. and I can look at these others. Any others that you want to? Yes.
Can I just quickly clarify? Are you suggesting that you are going to update the trajectory with the figures in our additional hearings?
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
I mean, they're not like wildly different from your assumptions, but it just sort of tightens, makes it more accurate.
No, I think that's great, and very happy to get that information. Thank you.
Just sorry, the other one I wanted to ask St William about and you about, based on your statement, there's some tweaks to 3 or 4.
Yes.
The East Ham Gasworks is the significant different one,
Yes, but
which you're saying you think will deliver by 2032, 700. Is that right?
yes. So obviously it doesn't have planning yet.
Yes.
So,
And it's a complicated site.
and it's a complicated site, so there's a few hurdles to get through
Yes.
first. But yeah, based on our sort of initial feasibility, it's 650 to 700 homes.
Yeah.
And let me just remind myself of the year that we think it's going to come forward by 2037, actually. All of those homes.
Oh, right. Well, so what was the contribution to the 5-year supply? Sorry, I misread.
I'm not sure if it would
Okay.
contribute to the 5-year.
So which size?
Sorry, this is the
East Ham Gasworks.
East Ham Gasworks. It's the allocation
It's a site without planning.
N13 SA3. We're going to be discussing it again because it's the one with the green belt and
Yes.
various things.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Can we? Sorry, I think I must have misread your. You got your statement there.
Yeah, I'm just having a look. Yeah, I don't think in the statement we put a year to it. We were just sort of putting a marker down. Yeah, it says 2037 in our statement.
Okay, I'm just using I think like this. Okay, so you're not assuming anything in the 5-year supply.
No, I'll double check.
It seems rather optimistic investor.
Yeah, I think given that it doesn't yet have
Yeah.
planning, there would need to be remediation works.
Yeah.
I think it's probably unrealistic to assume it would go for 5 years.
Right. Okay. So the council position is the figures are as they are, minus 1,300 from 10% West.
Yes, I believe so. So yeah, I think from what I remember from Thameside West, they would,
They said 1,300.
1,200 in 5 years. So yeah, we'd update that, and then we made those minor corrections as well to the St William sites as well, just to
Well, I'm not sure I want another set of figures.
Okay.
Another version of the trajectory. I think what I will do, unless I ask for it, I'll work with this and I'll say what I, think is justified or not justified in it, whatever, when I need to. If I need another version of figures, I'll ask for it. I think, already had a few and go on forever. And it is a comprehensive picture as at the 1st of April 2025. You could, as 9 months on or whatever, things change, don't they? Okay.
Sorry, I'm just clarifying East Ham. It's not my project. We anticipate first homes from 2031.
Right.
And completion by 2035. So
Right.
it could sneak in to the tail end of the 5-year period, but yeah.
Well, I think. Anyway, so if we did take off the 1,300, we get a figure, don't we, of, I think, what it would be slightly less than the 5-year requirement.
There is a little bit of contingency in there, but
well, the figure was.
sorry.
So
So at the moment, we assume the projected delivery would be 22,113.
yeah,
And the 5-year target with 20% buffer included results in a target of 20,575.
Yeah.
So
1,300. 1,300.
1,300. So my math is good as it once was. No, it's not. Let me do it here.
I'll let you do the maths.
So if we're looking at a figure of 20,830, if you were to minus 1,300 from the projected delivery, which is 22,000.
Because you're a healthy 5-year supply surplus of a few hundred.
Comes out, yeah, not very much.
Right, so, I mean, it's an exercise any national policy expects us to do, isn't it? I think your point would be, well, there's various bits of things that you alluded to about, not being overly optimistic, which I think say, well, clearly, we're building any trade or any sort of optimistic scenario, you're down below the 5-year supply.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that council probably has 5 years supply roughly hovering somewhere around the 5-year mark. I think they've probably got the sites in the supply they need to meet the 5-year supply, but we'd obviously encourage them to be as supportive and as liberal as possible in relation to the sites that they do have, to make sure that there is that, that 5-year supply actually happens in reality. And to have a regard for even if the latter isn't actually applied, regard to the fact that a portion of sites might not come forward, and indeed in some instances developers might, in current economic, very uncertain, particularly recent geopolitical shifts. As we know, developers are extremely risk averse and pay attention to market conditions. And it may well be that in the coming years that a portion of developers might decide not to progress certain sites in the way they want. And I suppose what we're saying is, the sites are in there, but let's make sure that we make the most of the sites that are in there.
Okay, thank you. There was a brief period of time when it mattered quite a lot when I concluded about a 5-year supply and adoption. There was a fleeting period of national policy, which I think has come and gone, whereby if I concluded that kind of gave you a guaranteed 5-year supply for 5 years or something. I think that's gone, hasn't it? It's a soundness test that I have to conclude on, whether it's a 5-year supply, because it's one of the things that NPPF asks for plans to do. So I won't reach a conclusion on it, but I think you'll always be in the case where you need to demonstrate 5-year supply at the time. And what you're doing that again, as has been pointed out, could change pretty soon. Right, okay. Thank you all. Anything else then on 5-year supply before we finish? Or indeed anything else on this housing supply figures? Let me just go back to the policy and the modification. 2 things about that. One, does this issue about what the trajectory shows for delivery against the London Plan target between 25 and 27, yeah? So I think that's... Then let's go back to St William. You were saying about how it's expressed in terms of...
Exceeding that point.
Sorry?
Exceeding.
Yes, where would this... policy...
It's a new policy. I appreciate the NPPF only got published December for consultation. But policy HO2 of the new NPPF requires housing targets, and there's 2 parts to it. Second part says to be higher than the overall figure identified in the local housing needs assessment where appropriate. So it sets an aspirational sort of position, which is actually already reflected in the current NPPF paragraph 16, which is about the preparation of local plans, politically. But that talks about requiring plans to be prepared positively in a way that is aspirational but deliverable, which is what we've been thinking about today.
Yeah.
And then I gave the Lewisham local plan as an example, which is not too dissimilar to the amendments that you have made to policy H1, but it's quite explicit in talking about need to optimise, which this policy now does say.
Or is it, sorry, when are you looking at policy H1?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the wording that says, I think it's actually, sorry, in supporting text. It's where it talks about the higher trajectory and explains about that being reliant on optimization of site allocations. So it's on the FM05. So it's the amendment, it's paragraph 3.174.
Yeah.
And it says the higher growth figures are dependent on significant infrastructure projects, unlocking development sites and optimised housing delivery on comprehensively master planned site allocations. And I get that's the sort of main explanation in policy in the supporting text about the higher range figure. And I guess what I'm suggesting is whether there's scope to just give perhaps greater weight or emphasis to the higher range figure and be more explicit that ideally we'd be targeting that higher range rather than the lower range. And if possible, weave in some wording about exceeding.
I still can't find the phrase that you've got in my version of 3174. Sorry.
I think it's one of the proposed modifications to the justification text. So it's FM 0.05.
Yeah, that's the one I'm looking at.
0 FM
05.
And it's part of the justification text. So it's at the bottom of that paragraph.
The box under the step trajectory. I could bring my laptop over.
I'm just going down. I'm just going down. FM 05. Yeah. There's two paragraphs. Yeah.
It's the last paragraph.
Starting a detailed review of each site allocation.
Over the course of our plan period, Newham will look to enable the delivery of between. So it's the paragraph after that.
Yeah.
And then in that paragraph, it starts with the higher growth figures are dependent.
Yeah, so
So it's that sentence.
yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll read it with me. I understand the point. Right. Okay, thank you. Anything else on this morning's agenda? No, okay. So in terms of, I think probably most of you are back tomorrow in terms of how to develop management and tall buildings. So as I say, we've got the modifications to the code, which are not in the schedule or in that document, which I referred to, but not what the number is. We've also got the map that goes with it, which shows the changes, but the boundary lines and the colour lines for them reflecting the different heights. So we'll talk about those before we look at the responses. Okay, anything else from today? Anybody wishes to say? Thank you all, and I'll see you this afternoon, and I'll see the rest of you tomorrow. Thank you. It will be the same for the rest of the week. Yeah. So I'll be around now. I'm staying. It's quite good. Yeah. I would try. Yeah, so I've got to run this. I need to do battery again.
Yeah, I think.
I need to go through batteries really quickly.
The least energy efficient
Yours-
microphones.
I think yours always on. We've got some further.
You need some.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'm sure you do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.